Welcome to Dark Domain, where the boundaries between the real and the unreal are never quite clear. Tonight I have 3 tales for you. Stories of time gone awry, reality fraying at the edges, and a world where nothing is quite as it seems. As you listen, remember, sometimes the scariest things are not what's lurking in the shadows, but the moments when we realize we can't escape the strange forces that bind us. Settle in, but keep your senses sharp, because these stories might leave you questioning the world around you. Before you go any further, take a moment. If you found yourself trapped in time, living one moment over and over, what would it be? Share your answer in the comments below, then continue listening, if you dare. Fragments of Forever. I don't remember when the sun stopped rising on time. I could have sworn it was yesterday, but that doesn't mean anything anymore. Here, nothing means anything. When it all started, I chalked it up to exhaustion. I'd been working long hours, barely sleeping. It wasn't unusual to lose track of time. Days would bleed into nights without me even noticing. But this was different. It was mid-afternoon when I glanced at the clock on my desk. 2:47 p.m. or so, I thought. 5 minutes later, I checked again, and it still said 2:47. My phone had the same time. I reset it, thinking it was frozen, but nothing changed. Hours went by and the minute hand didn't budge. I stepped outside for some fresh air, and that's when I saw the sky. It was caught in a golden hue, frozen in the magic hour, when the sun hovers just above the horizon, casting long shadows that never fade. At first, it was beautiful, a perpetual sunset, but after a while, it felt oppressive. I went back inside, hoping it was a glitch, something that would sort itself out. But it didn't. For days, or maybe weeks, time remained stuck. Every clock I owned, every electronic device refused to move past that moment. I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Then I started seeing the people. They weren't ghosts, at least not in the way you'd imagine. They looked real, as if plucked straight out of everyday life. But something was off. They appeared, flickering in and out of existence, carrying on with their tasks in endless loops, like actors stuck in a scene they couldn't escape. There was the woman in the red coat who always stood at the corner of my street, glancing at her watch. Every 10 seconds, she'd check the time, look up, and frown, as if waiting for someone. A couple sat at a cafe, laughing and drinking coffee that never seemed to cool. A man in a business suit would walk past my apartment at exactly 7:15 p.m. every evening, even though the sun never set. It wasn't just them. I felt it too. I'd go about my day, only to realize I'd done the exact same thing the day before. Every conversation, every gesture, replayed with unnerving precision. If I deviated from the routine, the world around me would correct itself. If I didn't follow my usual route home from work, the streets would twist and bend until I found myself back where I was supposed to be, always in that same eternal twilight. I tried talking to the others, but they wouldn't respond. It was like they couldn't see me. I waved my hand in front of the man in the suit. Nothing. It was as if I wasn't there, or worse, they weren't. One night, or what I assumed was night, I saw something change. It was subtle. A ripple in the fabric of the world. The man in the suit stopped, just for a second. He glanced over his shoulder as if someone had called his name. I froze, not daring to breathe. Then just as quickly he resumed walking, the moment forgotten. But it gave me hope. If he could break free, maybe I could too. I began testing the boundaries. I'd repeat the same action over and over, hoping to create a fracture in the routine. One evening, I grabbed a cup of coffee from the cafe where the couple sat. They didn't notice, of course. The coffee was hot, too hot, and it burned my hand, but I forced myself to hold on to it. I took a sip, willing the taste to pull me back into reality. For a brief moment, I thought it worked. The sky dimmed, the streetlights flickered on. But then the world snapped back and I was stuck in the same endless dusk. Then came the whispers. It started as a low hum, something just at the edge of hearing, barely perceptible. Over time, it grew louder, clearer, until I could make out the words. "You don't belong here." The voices came from everywhere and nowhere. They whispered in my ear when I slept, muttered behind me as I walked. But every time I turned around, no one was there. "You don't belong here." That's when I realized neither did they. I began to suspect that this world wasn't real, or rather it was real, but not in the way I understood. The people around me weren't alive. They were echoes, trapped in their own cycles, repeating the same actions over and over, bound to a specific moment in time. And I was no different. My moment came back to me in flashes. An accident, the sound of screeching tires, glass shattering, my body weightless as I hurtled through the air. That was my last memory before I woke up in this place. Was this purgatory? A limbo between life and death? Or was it worse? I tried to leave. I packed a bag and drove as far as the roads would take me. But no matter where I went, I always ended up back at my apartment, staring at the unmoving clock, caught in the same moment. It's been months, years, since I stopped trying. The sun still hangs in the sky, casting its eternal glow, and the people continue their mindless routines. I've learned to accept it, even as the whispers grow louder. "You don't belong here." But maybe I do. Maybe I always did. The static. I used to think nothing could ever surprise me. After all, I worked as a night technician at a small local broadcasting station. Graveyard shifts, a few dials, fixing glitches, easy work. I had spent years sitting in front of silent machines, basking in the dim glow of endless screens. But one night, everything changed. It started as a regular Tuesday night. The station was dead quiet as always, with only a handful of pre-recorded shows airing. I settled into my chair, prepared to spend another night battling sleep and watching old forgotten programs loop into oblivion. That's when the interference started. At first it was subtle, just a flicker on one of the monitors. Nothing new, just the kind of static that happens on an old transmission. I adjusted the frequency and watched as the screen returned to normal. But then it happened again. Another flicker, and this time something appeared in the static. A shape, just for a split second. But I saw it. A figure. I leaned in, rewinding the footage. The static burst. The shape came, and it was gone again. I paused it right on the frame where the shape had appeared. It was blurry, hard to make out, but it looked like a person, someone tall and slender, standing still amidst the black and white haze. But there was no show airing that matched that image. In fact, the channel was supposed to be off air. Strange, I thought. Maybe a signal bleed from another channel? I brushed it off and moved on, keeping the frequency clear. But as the hours dragged on, the flickering grew worse. Every few minutes, static would flood the screens, not just one, but all of them. A cacophony of white noise. And that figure, the shape in the static, it kept appearing. Except now, it was clearer, closer. At first, I laughed it off. Told myself I was tired, maybe seeing things. But by 2 a.m., it wasn't funny anymore. The figure had become unmistakable. A man, his outline sharp, but his features still blurred by the static. His head was tilted slightly, like he was staring at something off camera. Every time he appeared, he was a little closer to the screen. But the worst part wasn't the figure itself. It was what happened when he appeared. The room grew cold, a kind of damp, suffocating cold that seeped through the walls. My breath would catch, and the hum of the station's machines became distant, like they were underwater. Then, as suddenly as the figure appeared, the cold would vanish and the room returned to normal. I checked the equipment. Everything seemed fine. No signal bleed, no malfunction. But the static kept coming. Every time I adjusted the frequency, every time I cleared the interference, the man returned. Closer. Always closer. It got to the point where I started keeping the lights on in the booth, afraid of the dark pressing in through the windows. There was no one else in the building, just me and the machines, and the man who lived in the static. At 3:30 a.m., something changed. The static hit again, this time harder. The sound of it rattled the speakers, a harsh crackling that filled the room. I scrambled to fix it, but no matter what I did, it wouldn't go away. All the screens filled with static, but the man was gone. I stared at the monitors, a knot forming in my stomach. For the first time that night, I realized I didn't want to see what happened next. Then, in the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Not on the screen, behind me. I froze. My hand hovered over the controls as the cold enveloped the room again, thicker this time. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Slowly, I turned my head. There, in the reflection of the control room window, I saw him. The man from the static. He was standing in the booth with me just a few feet behind my chair. His features were still vague, like a shadow made of television snow. His head tilted the same way it had been on the screens. But now, he was here. Outside the static. In the room. In my world. I spun around, heart pounding in my chest, but the booth was empty. My pulse thundered in my ears. I turned back to the screens, praying for the static to clear. The sound continued to hiss and crackle, louder than before, but the man wasn't on the monitors anymore. I glanced at the window again, feeling the weight of unseen eyes. The reflection was clear. He was closer. No, not closer. He was right behind me. My breath came in shallow gasps. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, locked in a terror I had never known. Slowly, I felt it. The cold sensation of something brushing against my neck. Not a hand. No, it was the static itself. It was crawling up my skin, sinking into me, filling me with that same distorted crackle. I bolted from the booth, not bothering to shut down the equipment. I ran down the empty hallway, the flickering lights overhead casting shadows that twisted in the corners of my vision. When I reached the exit, I slammed through the doors and stumbled into the parking lot. The station loomed behind me, silent except for the faint echo of static in my ears. My car was parked just a few feet away, but I didn't move. I stood there, staring at the building, half expecting the man to appear in the doorway, waiting. I never went back to that station. They say the late-night static is just interference, a glitch in the signal. But I know the truth. There's something living in those frequencies, something watching. And once it sees you, it doesn't let go. The hands of time. The day I stumbled upon the old clockmaker's shop, it felt like the world had paused. The clouds hung like paintings in the sky, and the city's usual rhythm of life seemed eerily out of sync. The quaint, ivy-clad building looked out of place, wedged between two towering modern structures. Its wood-paneled exterior and fogged windows beckoned with an antiquated charm, as if time itself had forgotten this little pocket of the world. I didn't know what pulled me toward it, but the urge was irresistible. The bells above the door chimed softly as I stepped inside. A myriad of clocks lined the walls, their ticking creating an oddly comforting hum. Some clocks were grand, almost regal in stature, with ornate designs and gilded details. Others were small, with simple faces and quiet ticks, the kind you'd imagine on a mantelpiece in someone's grandparents' house. Yet, despite the hundreds of clocks in the room, none of them struck the hour. Behind the counter, a man stood with his back to me. His silhouette was hunched, hands busy at work with the delicate gears of a pocket watch. The workshop smelled of varnished wood and brass. I cleared my throat softly, not wanting to startle him, but his raspy voice spoke before I had a chance to greet him. "I wondered when you'd arrive," he said without turning. A shiver traced my spine. "You knew I was coming?" He chuckled, a low, dry sound that reminded me of the creak of old wood. "I know the time of everyone who enters my shop." I frowned, the discomfort creeping in more now. "The time?" "Their time," he clarified, finally turning to face me. His eyes were pale, nearly white, with a glint that spoke of wisdom beyond the ordinary. His face was aged, skin crisscrossed with wrinkles that seemed etched by centuries of care. "How much time they have left?" I let out a nervous laugh. That's a bit of an odd thing to say, don't you think? Is it? His eyes didn't leave mine. You'd be surprised how little time most people have, even those who think they have forever. I glanced around the shop, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. Your clocks. None of them seem to be working. He nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. They only work when someone's time is measured. I forced a smile, but his words dug into my mind. What do you mean? He stepped forward, his bony hand gesturing toward a large antique grandfather clock in the corner of the room. Its face was dark, the hands frozen in place. That clock belongs to you. To me? Yes. It's been waiting for your arrival. My heart skipped a beat. The whole atmosphere of the shop began to shift, as if the air had thickened. I could hear my pulse, the sound of my own breath becoming loud in my ears. This is a joke, right? The clockmaker's lips barely moved as he whispered, "Time waits for no one." I stepped back instinctively, my heart pounding. The grandfather clock loomed large in the corner of the room, and to my horror, the hands began to move, but not forward. They were spinning backward. At first they ticked slowly, but then they gained speed, whirring around the face of the clock with impossible urgency. I reached out to steady myself against a nearby counter, feeling the room tilt around me. What's happening? The clockmaker's gaze never wavered. You've been living on borrowed time, he said calmly. But time always finds a way to collect its debts. I couldn't breathe. His words hit me like ice water. Borrowed time? The phrase echoed in my head. I remembered the childhood accident, when I had fallen into the icy river and nearly drowned, only to be pulled out just in time. Then the car accident a few years ago that I had walked away from with barely a scratch, despite the vehicle being totaled. And that choking incident in the restaurant where I'd felt the world darken at the edges before someone intervened. Moments of near death that I had written off as luck. No, this isn't real, I stammered. This can't be happening. The ticking of the clocks grew louder, as if the shop itself was echoing my impending fate. The air around me felt thick, heavy, like something was pulling me toward an invisible force. The ticking wasn't just in the air, it was inside my head. There are moments we're not meant to survive, the clockmaker continued. Some cheat time, whether by accident or design. But those moments, they always catch up. I backed away, my body feeling sluggish, as though time itself was slowing me down. I'm not dying, I managed, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure if I believed the words. The clock's hand spun faster, a blur of motion, ticking toward some unseen point of no return. The noise was deafening now, each tick reverberating in my bones. My limbs felt heavy, and with each passing second, I felt weaker. You can't escape time, he whispered, stepping closer. But you can delay it. You can bargain. The word hung in the air like a lifeline. I grabbed it. Bargain? He smiled, cold and sharp, and reached into his vest pocket. From it, he withdrew a small silver pocket watch, its surface smooth and polished to a perfect gleam. I give you time, he said softly. A little more. But you give me something in return. My gaze flickered to the watch. The hands on its face were still, frozen at midnight, but it pulsed in his hand, as though alive with the seconds it held captive. Desperation clawed at my throat. What do you want from me? Time, he said simply. Yours, to be exact. A little piece of it, just enough to keep you going. I stared at him, the ticking of the clocks like a heartbeat in my ears. What was he asking for? My life in exchange for a few more moments? The weight of his words pressed down on me, but I had no choice. I could feel the threads of time unraveling around me, pulling me toward an end I wasn't ready to meet. With trembling hands, I reached out. What do I have to do? He placed the pocket watch in my palm, his touch as cold as death itself. Make your choice, he whispered. The air in the shop grew still. My breath hitched, the ticking fading into a distant murmur as I clutched the watch. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for my decision. I closed my eyes, squeezing the watch tight. "Fine," I whispered. "I'll take the deal." A sudden silence fell over the shop. The ticking stopped, and the weight that had been pressing down on me lifted. My limbs felt lighter. My breath came easier. Slowly, I opened my eyes. The clocks on the walls had returned to their frozen state. The grandfather clock stood still in the corner, its hands motionless. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, but something felt off. The clockmaker stepped back, his pale eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You've bought yourself some time," he said. "But remember, every second is borrowed, and one day time will come to collect." I left the shop in a daze, the silver pocket watch heavy in my hand. As I stepped outside, the world resumed its usual pace. People hurried past me, cars honked in the distance, and the sky seemed brighter, more vibrant, but the sense of dread lingered. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the watch. I placed it on my nightstand, its still face reflecting the moonlight. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I had more time, that the deal was done, but deep down, I knew better. Days passed. The watch never ticked, but I began to notice changes. I moved slower. My body felt heavier. People who passed me on the street seemed to blur at the edges, as though they existed on a plane I was slipping away from. And then one evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I heard it, the ticking. At first, it was faint, barely audible, but it grew louder, more insistent. I looked around, searching for the source, but the clocks on the walls were silent. The sound came from the pocket watch. I picked it up, and to my horror, the hands were moving. Slowly, methodically, they ticked forward. Tick, tock. Time was running out. Thank you for joining me on Dark Domain. If you enjoyed these stories of warped time and eerie reality, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. And don't forget, leave your comments below about your own unsettling moments. Until next time, remember, time may wait for no one, but here in the Dark Domain, it can twist in ways you'll never expect. Stay safe, if you can.